We knew that the train would arrive at about 8:15. I was leaving Oxford and going to Prague for a conference. Dean and Eddie were 5 and 3 years old. Melanie walked with us to the train station. She had a work obligation, so would be joining us in a few days. My friend Jonathan was already there. He and I were both presenting papers at a conference in Prague. And my professor, Paul Fittis, was also traveling on the same train to go to the same conference, to train to an airport and then to fly to Prague. Our happy little crew gathered there on the platform. Paul's wife, Marion, had walked with him, and she waited with Melanie on the other side. We could see them over there, and they could see us, and we waited for the train. We knew it was coming. Or did we? We expected it. We thought it was coming, but did we, in our expectation, in our looking down the track, anticipating it showing up like a speck on the horizon, did we know with absolute certitude? My soul waits upon the Lord. We relate to God by waiting. We wait in faith. We wait with the expectation that something is going to happen or something is happening. We don't know exactly when it's going to happen. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. We don't know for sure. Sort of like the arrival of a national rail train in Oxford. Paul Tillich describes our journey of faith as one that is waiting. He writes, waiting means not having and having at the same time. And when we climb inside this psalm and really get inside the words, we find an assurance of God's presence while we are at the same time anticipating God. God is omnitemporal and omnipresent. God is always, everywhere, and in all places at the same time. This is a part of our faith and our belief in who God is, but it's also reflected quite deeply in the psalm. And it's a statement of faith in our lives. The way we experience God is through this journey of waiting. Right now, we're waiting for Easter. This is the 5th Sunday in Lent. And some people give something up for Lent. I've heard different people mention what they've given up this year. Other people add something for Lent. I'm going to read a devotional every day during Lent. I'm going to more actively participate in my prayer life in Lent. Some people prepare for this season they've been attending the weekday services here at the church, the community Lenten services. Regardless of how we prepare, Lent, this season, every year, is by design a season of waiting and expectation. This is why some churches and some traditions sing no hallelujahs in Lent, because they're looking ahead to the glory of Easter. We don't do that, but others do. The psalmist echoes this sense of waiting. This is the 11th of the Song of Ascents, this grouping of Psalms 120 to 134. And it likely originated in the cultic practices of ancient Judaism, where as they ascended, went up to the temple, they had songs that they would sing. And this is one of those songs. They continue to give meaning, though, in our lives. As we return to these Psalms, as a part of this series, looking at a different one of the Psalms each week, they can continue to give meaning to our lives, regardless of what season we're in, because we can climb inside the Psalm and we can see something about God. We can learn about who God is and who we are. Psalm 130 is one of the 7 penitential psalms. Penitence is that act of showing regret, repenting, turning away. And so just as we go up to God, we turn away from our sinfulness. We turn away from all those things that serve to separate us from God. It begins, out of the depths, I cry to you, O Lord. A song of ascending begins in a very low place. Instead of beginning, look at the day, look at how glorious it is, look at how blessed we are, this song begins out of the depths. When things get really bad, that's when we get really good at praying. When things get really bad, that's when we get really good at being open to God. There are no atheists in foxholes. You've heard that said. There are no atheists on a boat in a storm. I can testify to that. When things are good, we feel confident. It's really easy to forget about our continuous need for God, our continuous need for forgiveness. When things are good, we turn inward to ourselves to be self-reliant. But it's when it's bad, when we can honestly look around the situation in our lives and say, out of this, and this is depths. We look around and we say, man, could it get any lower? Even with the opening cry in the first two verses, God didn't resolve the situation. So there's this need for confession. I cry to you out of the depths of my despair, and God was doing something. So the psalmist goes on, don't look at my iniquities, don't measure all of that up. And yet we wait. How do we proclaim God and simultaneously admit we do not have God, control God, keep God? We have God through not having Him. In this act of waiting, we have ascended out of our depths of despair to a point at which our waiting has become faith. It's not just waiting. It's an act of worship. As we engage in waiting for God, we've entered the basic truth of the gospel. And the good news of Easter is Christ is risen. That is what we celebrate as we gather around this table. Yes, we had Easter last year, but we look ahead to Easter this year. During Lent, we revisit this act of waiting as a part of our faith journey. When we wait, we recognize the vulnerability that we have, our need for God's mercy. God moves, God acts, God engages, and to some extent, when we truly worship and we truly look and we truly engage with God in our lives, we realize God is hidden. Not absent, not gone. When we wait, when we're in this act of waiting, we live in embodied faith, expressing our belief and our trust in the miracle of Easter by continuing to wait, by continuing to be engaged, by continuing to look to God even when we look down the track and we don't see our Lord yet. There's a problem when we claim to possess God, when we can define God clearly and wrap our arms around this notion of who God is. When we don't acknowledge this hiddenness or this mystery or this need of to wait, we start to encapsulate God into a neat little package. Then all of our beliefs fit neatly into a box and we have a religion. See what I just did there? Moved from faith to religion. And at that point, we have a religion that doesn't include God. God can't be contained. In C.S. Lewis's allegory, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, Aslan, the lion, represents God. And at one point, the beaver, if you haven't read it, go out and pick it up and read it. The beaver can talk. These are personified woodland creatures. Tries to explain Aslan to the children. He'll be coming and going, Mr. Beaver said. One day you'll see him and another day you won't. He doesn't like being tied down, and of course he has other countries to attend to. It's quite all right. He'll often drop in, only you mustn't press him. He's wild, you know, not a tame lion at all. We like a tame God, don't we? We like a God who's warm and cuddly and doesn't challenge us or push us or take us outside of our comfort zones or ask us to do things that we don't normally like to do. God is not a tame lion. Just as the children had to wait for Aslan to appear in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, we wait for God. In the 5th verse of this psalm, we proclaim our waiting from the depths of our being. The New Revised Standard Version, what I just read out of, says, I wait for the Lord, my soul waits. And then in verse 6, my soul waits for the Lord. And we run across this Hebrew word, nephesh, that we rightly translate, in many translations, as soul, but it doesn't mean what we think of when we hear the word soul in English. Our word soul really comes from the Greek. This is where we inherited a lot of philosophy in our worldview. And so when we hear the word soul, we have this Platonic dualistic vision of this part of us that is intangible. Hebrew nephesh means much more than that. It's our whole sense of being, who we are, the seat of appetites and desires. It's an inner abstract quality that makes us who we are. And I'll be honest, when I was looking at this passage this week, my Lenten journey has been to try something new with the passages. And so I start out with the Hebrew or the Greek. And last week it was virtually impossible because I was talking about the 23rd Psalm. So I kind of knew where it was going the whole time. But I never in a million years would have translated nephesh as soul. Not until I looked it up in the English. It's almost inner animal is part of the notion. This is the kind of waiting that is transformative, when this inner sense of self, everything that makes us who we are, my nephesh waits for you, God. Because we wait in faith, knowing that the one for whom we wait is coming and has the power to transform our lives. We know that the one for whom we wait can conquer death. How do we know God? Revelation itself is how we know God. God revealing God's self. Not us figuring it out, using our bright little minds. No, God is doing the revealing. God is revealing God's self. Revelation itself is needed for knowing that God is hidden and we, humanity, is blind. We cannot see God, and if we think we know, we deceive ourselves. We know God through God's self-revelation. Now, the Bible is the envelope of that revelation, but we don't worship the Bible, and the Bible is not the revelation itself. In Psalm 130, we find a plaintive cry for God's help and presence. Instead of demanding the answer, we wait in faith, hope, in love, and in truth. We did sit on that platform for a little bit. We waited until 8:15 when the train showed up right on time. And we got on it and continued our journey. And likewise, we wait for God. Just as the psalmist assures, God will arrive.